And greetings, friends. Today I want to talk to you about Genesis, the 4th chapter, verse 17, that says, "And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch." Now, a lot of people say, well, how can this be? Where did Cain's wife come from? We don't see any evidence of Cain's wife being born in the Bible. Well, let's see if that's true. In Genesis, the 4th chapter, here we see Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain. And then in verse 2, it says she bare his brother Abel. And here we see Cain and Abel, the famous story of Cain and Abel, and when Cain slew Abel because God rejected his offering and was very jealous of Abel. But notice verse 3, it says, "And in the process of time," it didn't happen right after their birth when Cain slew Abel. There was a process of time. And during that process of time, we read in Genesis 4, and then in verse 25, after the slaying of Abel and Cain was ousted, it says here that Adam knew his wife again and bare a son and called his name Seth. And then it says here in Genesis 5, verse 3, it says that Adam lived 130 years and begot a son in his own likeness and after his image, and called his name Seth. So he was 130 years. So in Genesis 4, there is a 130-year span. In 130 years, do people think that Adam and Eve couldn't have had other children? Well, of course they could have. And we'll see here, notice, after Cain slew Abel, here he says to God, Cain says to God in verse 14, he says, "Behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from thy face shall I be hid, and I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth. And it shall come to pass that every one that findeth me shall slay me." Who are these people? I mean, if it was just Adam and Eve on the earth with Cain after Abel was slain, if it was just Adam and Eve there, why didn't he just say, "If my father comes and slays me"? Instead he says, "Everyone that findeth me shall slay me." Obviously there are other people on the earth. And then notice the Lord, what he says here in verse 15. He says, "And the Lord said unto him, Therefore whosoever slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken upon him sevenfold. And then the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him." Any? It says, vengeance shall be taken upon him, whosoever slayeth Cain. Obviously, there are other people on this earth. There's 130 years. So obviously, there are other people on this earth. And when you go back to Genesis 4:25, notice it says that they had Seth, and then it says, "For God said, she hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. And to Seth, to him also there was born a son." Where did Seth get his wife from? Well, obviously there are other people on this earth. Besides Cain, Abel, Seth, Adam, and Eve. There are other people. They are just not mentioned. And the reason they are not mentioned is because the Genesis account names only Adam's dominant children, those who had a profound effect on history. So the Bible's just zeroing in on these characters because they had a profound effect on the history of man. And that's why it doesn't mention other people. But notice Adam in Genesis 5:4, notice what it says here. It says, "And the days of Adam after he had begotten Seth were 800 years, and he begot sons and daughters." So there are the other people. And in other versions, it's in the ERV version, ESV, GNB, it says, "He had other children," and it means other children besides Seth. So there are other children other than Seth. So obviously there were other people on this earth. They are just not named. They are just not mentioned. The Bible just zeroes in on the people who had a profound effect on history. Now I want to read you this from Discovering God's Power by Doris Craig. She writes this on page 81. It says, "The question is often asked, where did Cain get his wife? By this time, Adam and Eve had many sons and daughters and even grandchildren. Some believe that Adam and Eve's offspring could have numbered as many as 32,000 by this time in Cain's life, for Adam was possibly 129 years old when Cain murdered Abel. These children of Adam would be the ones whom Cain had feared might kill him in vengeance because he had killed their brother Abel. Of course, they loved Abel. He killed Abel, and they were seeking vengeance. That's why we read here in Genesis that everyone that findeth me shall slay me. They wanted to take vengeance on him because he killed Abel. So obviously there are other people on this earth. And then it says, there was no law against a man marrying his near relatives at this time. They seem weird to us today, but back then it was not. And God allowed that first, second, and maybe third generation of people to marry, sister and brother and close relatives. He allowed those first generations to do so because obviously the human population had to multiply, because God says in Genesis 1:28, be fruitful and multiply, he told Adam and Eve. Then it says here, the human race sprang from a single couple. And it's obvious that Cain married one of his sisters. And then it says, Adam and Eve, so obviously, she says, so obviously they would have had to marry close relatives in the early days. Adam married even closer than a sister. He married his own rib. And you read the story of God taking out the rib, and then he built Eve. And you also read in the Bible, you see in these early generations, Adam married his half-sister Sarah in Genesis 20, verse 12. And his brother Nahor married his brother Haran's daughter, and that you can read that in Genesis 11, 27 and 29. But then when you get to the time of Moses, Moses prohibited this in Leviticus 18:6 and 11, because now we're moving along further down through time, and at that time there was a great chance of if relatives married one another, of brother and sister and so on, that would greatly increase the danger of passing on inherited diseases and birth defects to any children that were conceived. And she puts it this way: the bloodstream of a man was fairly pure, and there was no harm in close relatives marrying and having children in that day. The stream is always pure at the source, and this is why there was no harm in it back in the early generations. The stream was always pure at the source. Every generation, like the cities on the bank of a stream, puts its sewage into the human race. As sin greatly increased, then and as the generations passed, God eventually said, all right, it's prohibited now for close relatives to marry one another, and that's why we read that in Leviticus, the 18th chapter. So to say that you can't prove in the Bible that where Cain got his wife is just another Bible misconception.